This is the Be One Change One podcast, where our mission is to help listeners define values, practice integrity, and inspire change.
Our vision is to mentor men and empower them to achieve more by taking responsibility for shaping their own lives.
He's CAS, an evolving man who has been shaped by adversity and continues to grow through his imperfections.
And he's Roscoe, an imperfect work in progress that tries to suck less every day.
Between us, we have over 40 years of Air Force fighter pilot experience with countless hours as trainers, instructors, and mentors.
Join us and learn to take responsibility for your own life as we dive into subjects from leadership to resilience to vulnerability.
Be the one who changes their course. Be decisive, driven, and purposeful. Set the example for others. Lead. We wish we'd had this show when we were younger men.
Be the one.
All right. Welcome back.
Welcome back.
So I had this really great idea to talk about wrestling with potential. And anybody who believes that, I got some oceanfront property in Arizona. Everybody knows I'm not smart enough to come up with a topic like that. But I thought it would be a good piggyback. You know, Cass, when you brought it up, and to be fair, this is all Cass's idea, as usual. But the more I thought about it, dude, I was thinking like, this is a really good way to piggyback on when we did Hidden Potential by Adam Grant. And we dissected that back a few episodes ago, and I would encourage anybody that hasn't listened to that to go and listen to it. It's called Hidden Potential, the Science of Achieving Greater Things. And we really broke down some, just really in-depth sciencey type shit on finding your potential and unlocking those things inside of you that can really get you ahead. Well, this might be a good follow-up to it called Wrestling with That Potential. And what does that mean? Because I think a lot of times, man, I'm curious to get your thoughts on it. We're afforded opportunities, or we look and we see an opportunity, but it's so daunting to take that opportunity a lot of times. And sometimes you just don't know what you can really affect and what you can really do with that. So that's what we're going to talk about, man. How to, you've got this. Everybody is born with that thing inside of them. Every single person is. What do you do with it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, man. And I think a lot of times too, I think intuitively, we all have kind of hidden skills or maybe unrecognized skills and talents that maybe for whatever reason we haven't explored because it can be kind of, I think the process of like defining and finding and then developing your skills can be exciting on one hand, because you kind of get to learn about your own capabilities and skill sets. But I think it can also be very daunting, because it's that unknown piece, right? There's always those question marks, and I think
question mark. Yep.
Yeah, and I think that those unknown environments for a lot of us aren't very comfortable places. But
I see a theme emerging.
Right. But that's where you make your money, is by getting outside of your comfort zone, kind of stepping into, and Adam talked about that in the book, right? He talked about, the people that have been successful. The story that comes to mind from the book was the gal that was trying to learn another language, and was having a real hard struggle with it. And what did she finally do? She just went to the country and accepted the fact that she was going to suck for a couple of months, but went over there, got way outside of her comfort zone, and in 6 months she was speaking fluid, whatever it was, right? So, I think it can be very daunting, and I think there's a difficult piece to this too, because in order to kind of uncover the potential of maybe these dormant or undiscovered skills that we have, it requires a lot of self-reflection. Like, you really do have to be very introspective and kind of really think through and weed those things out. So I think that's the first piece of it, right? Is the self-inspection, the introspection, trying to figure out maybe what those things are. And that process in and of itself can take some time. And then the second step is having the courage. We talk about this, having courage over comfort, having the courage to step out, to get in the arena, and to try to do the work, knowing that you may come up short, knowing that you may fail, knowing that it may not turn out the way that you are expecting it to. And we'll talk about, I think, expectation management with these things is really important as well. But if you don't get in the arena, if you don't step outside of your comfort zone, then I think it becomes really difficult to realize the full extent of whatever that potential is. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think just for some definitions, just for some boundaries on the discussion here, when we talk about potential, I wouldn't want the listeners to think that we're talking necessarily just about talent.
Yeah.
Right. Because you can be naturally gifted in an area, and that will afford you a lot of potential to maybe excel in that area, provided that you develop the skills and do the hard work around that. But and it may not even be just something that you're good at right now. There could be something, maybe you've developed a skill, or you've been at something a really long time, and you're comfortable doing that. That doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have potential in another area, right? And so I think you're absolutely right, man. I think you hit the nail on the nugget there when you talked about you kind of have to sit in a dark room by yourself for a little bit, with a blank piece of paper, and start nugging some of this stuff out and go. I mean, first of all, I think a lot of this ties back into passion, for one, because if you're not passionate about something, you'll be less inclined to do the work required to realize that potential.
Yeah.
So I think it needs to be something that interests you, for one. And just because your mom or your grandma told you that you were good at something, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be something that you're passionate about and want to pursue for the rest of your life.
True. I think it can be even simpler than that, though, too. Like, theoretically, let's say, because we were talking about this in the pregame a little bit, so much of it goes back to the messaging that either you've gotten throughout your life, or maybe even just the messaging that you have with yourself, which is why the self-inspection piece is so important. But let's say maybe you're a person who lacks some self-confidence. And when it comes to an opportunity to be in a leadership position, you shy away because you don't feel like you're confident enough to take on that task. Well, that could be an untapped potential skill that you have that you may be really good at, because you've been self-confident or lack self-confidence in the past. You may have a lot of empathy, and being in a leadership position and stepping into that, but because of your awareness of a self-confidence issue, potentially being more open to feedback from your team, or being able to recognize when somebody's struggling with something and being able to approach that in a correct manner so that it doesn't affect their self-confidence. Like, there's a lot of things that could come from that, which you take as a weakness, that could actually be something that plays to a strength, and could be something that you end up being really good at. But you don't know until you get outside your comfort zone. You take that risk and opportunity, and then you try to develop the skills around it. So yeah, but I agree with you. I think passion's a big part of it when we talk about those bigger things, like maybe a particular profession to get involved in, or things like that.
Now, well, to get the conversation going, I just want to throw two things out there, and we can just kind of go down each and see how they compare and contrast to each other. But I want to talk about the fear of failure. And then on the other side of that same coin is the fear of success.
That's good.
Well, I mean, they're both real, and we talk about fear of failure. Like, everybody kind of knows what that means, but how does that compare and contrast to the fear of success? You may think that you really want this thing, and then you start thinking about it a little bit more, and you start kind of visualizing and going down that rabbit hole. And then you're like, man, I just don't know if I could deal with that if it were to actually happen. Like, I don't know if I'm ready for this. And then you start to get into things like imposter syndrome. And there's so many little things that start to come up when you start talking about actually climbing the mountain and getting to the top. The fear of failure piece of it, it's easy to talk about that because it's so in your face. The fear of success thing, I think it might be a little bit, more difficult, because really what you could do is you could bring unwanted attention on yourself.
Yeah. And
you could bring undue pressure on yourself, or unwanted responsibility. You know, we joked in the military about the reward for hard work is often more work.
Is more
You know,
work.
and that's kind of what we're talking about in a way.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that, Roscoe, because especially, you know, for me being an introvert, I'm not. It's uncomfortable for me when the spotlight's on me. Um, and I've gotten better at it as I've gotten older. But when I was younger, like the spotlight wasn't. It's not that I was uncomfortable in it, but I never enjoyed it. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so if you're an introvert, that fear of being in the spotlight, having all the attention on you, could be a huge thing that turns you away from
Yeah.
stepping into those opportunities, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of that goes to fear of failure, because fear of failure can be several different things. It could be, you know, just the fear of failing the task, you know, and coming up short of. It could be the expectations that maybe you have set for yourself. It can also be, you know, the fear of the expectations that you maybe think other people have for you, or disappointing other people. So, like, that fear of failure can manifest itself in so many different ways. And the problem is what that fear does oftentimes is exactly what you were saying, is it traps people in staying inside of their comfort zone, because if it's less scary, right? There's less of a chance that fear of failure is diminished. But if you do that, then you're missing out on the opportunity to maybe tap into some of these unrealized potentials, right? And so that's the wrestle with potential piece of it.
Well, in either of those cases that you talked about, though, you're going to have to do some shit that you might not be comfortable with.
Yeah.
Whether it's the fear of success or the fear of failure, you're going to have to eventually. You're going to have to come to terms with one of those.
Yep.
Right. And what's the alternative, though? You're either going to fail at it or you're going to succeed at it, and in the middle is just mediocrity. Right. And that's not what we talk about on our podcast. We talk about fucking stepping out and getting shit done and actually accomplishing stuff. And there is such a thing as goal fatigue. So I don't want everybody to think about like we're just running around all the time as these like super goal oriented people, but you can wear yourself out on that. That's all I'm saying. It's important
absolutely.
to take downtime, but there is a middle ground in that. And I think when you set forth to accomplish something, this is why we talk about when we set goals, we talk about making them objective, right? Specific and measurable, right? So that you can come back at the end of it and you can ask yourself, did I meet my goal? Yes or no? Well, that's either failure or success. However you've defined that in your goal planning process, whatever you defined as winning, you're going to have a yes or no, a black or a white. It's a plus or a minus on the board.
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes you might not be ready to deal with the success piece of it. That's what I was trying to get to, is like you just might not be mentally, or you might not be mentally prepared for the things that come with that success. Yeah. Like being in the spotlight, you know, and it's good if you know that about yourself going in, but what if you don't?
Yeah.
What if you've never had that? What if you've never been in that position and you don't know how you're going to react to it?
Sure. Well, I think that's all part of the self-inspection that continues on through the process, because like you were saying, in the military, you know, when you do good work, you get rewarded with more work. And so you may step out on something and be like, and then nail it, and you're feeling really good. But then all of a sudden, you know, the amount of work that you're given, or the complexity of the next task that you get is increased. And then it's almost like starting that whole process all over again. And that can be exhausting and overwhelming for people too. And so part of this too, though, is also finding what are your limits, you know, because we all have personal limits. And so there may be a point where you just have to go, yeah, this is getting too much, you know, or that's where you have to ask for some additional help. Because it starts to become something bigger than you can manage on your own. But to go back to what you were saying, I think that fear of failure manifests itself in a lot of different ways. And you mentioned one already, which is self-sabotage, right? Like you start on something and you go, hey, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling anxious. I'm way outside of my comfort zone, and people will start to self-sabotage themselves over that. Or procrastination. We've talked about that before. And what they found in research is procrastination isn't really a time management issue for most people. it's a getting outside of your comfort zone, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable for me to go tackle this project right now. So I'm just going to put it off and stay where it's easy
Yeah.
and quiet and less stressful instead of going out, diving in and getting it done.
Yeah.
So, um, you know, and at the end of the day, what happens when you allow those things to take over is that you end up settling for less than you're actually capable of achieving. And that's what we're really getting at on the podcast, right? Is you're so much more capable than you think you are, but you got to take some risk and you got to get uncomfortable to figure out
Yeah.
that piece of yourself, right? To figure out those things that you're actually capable of doing that you may not think that you are. So, and at the end of the day, I think overcoming that fear of failure just takes a little bit of a shift in perspective. We've talked about
Yeah.
this, how failure's one of our greatest teachers. And so looking at failure as an opportunity to learn, you know, and to grow, having that growth mindset. You know, that just because I fail, that's just an opportunity for me to learn. It's not a reflection on who I am or what my worth is to the organization or what my abilities, you know, fundamentally are. Um, so taking that, trying to take that judgment piece out of it and just focus on what are the takeaways.
Yeah.
If you even do fail, who knows, you may win exceedingly. But I think by gradually changing your perspective on that and then building in some of the resiliency tools that we've talked about in the past, and then when you start to get those small wins over and over and over again, then you start to build some confidence and you start to recognize that you can actually do these things. I I never really understood it in the moment when we were younger men in the fighter squadron, just how fortunate we were to be in an environment like that. Um, because it was just the environment we were living in. So I don't think I paid that much attention to it. But that opportunity every day to go out there and to challenge and to test and, you know, to find ways to get yourself better, uh, to start narrowing down the number of mistakes that you made on any given sortie, whether it was, you know, mech or comm or whatever, was just what a unique opportunity that was.
Well, you're almost always going to go out with someone who has more experience than you in a lot of ways. There's always a feedback mechanism built in, just baked right into the cake of how we do our training every day. And you could be number 4 and be a 200-hour wingman, but still have that critical piece in the debrief where everybody gets good learning out of it and everybody ups their game. And I think that that's something we took for granted a lot.
Yeah.
You know, when we're in it, you just kind of don't see it a lot of times. But you're right, man. I think that just the structure of it and the fact that we got so many reps doing that over and over every day, day in and day out, you're testing your limits. You're having to teach it to other people. You're giving and receiving feedback. Never, you know, in all of the flying that I did, never flew a perfect sortie. So always something to get better at. And I was listening to an interview the other day from a NASCAR champion, and he was debriefing on. I mean, he won the race, and he was debriefing on how he could have done better. The guy, he led something like 466 out of 500 laps of fucking ass whipping dominance at this short track race, and he's talking about ways that he can get better. I'm like,
Yeah.
dude, like you were the class
Take
of
the
the field,
W.
man. You come in there and stunk up the show for 3 fucking hours. Nobody even wanted to watch the race. You were so far ahead. Like everybody knew at the drop of the flag that you were going to win, right? And he's talking about the things that he can work on and get better balance in his car and very detailed stuff, you know. And I think that we take that for granted a lot. Something else that I think that we took for granted a lot was when we were in it. You know, when you're in it like that, and the stakes are so high and the pressure is so high, you don't really stop and think about it too much. You're just kind of going, right?
Yeah.
But if you're working on something in your personal life, and maybe it's a long-term goal, maybe it's a very lofty, audacious goal, you know, I think there's this little creep that comes into your mind eventually when you get close to the end of it, and that's that imposter syndrome. And that's something I'm dealing with a lot right now. And I've talked to Katie a lot about this recently of like, I've been spending a lot of time in my room by myself, just reading and thinking. And I think what it comes down to really is, if you're working on something audacious, something that's bigger, something maybe that you've never tried before, it's all very foreign to you. And you start to think, man, dude, if I put this out and let other people see this, then they're going to find out that I'm a fraud, right? They're going to find out that I've been wasting all this time and all these delusions of grandeur. And who the fuck are you,
Yeah,
man? You're a farm boy from Alabama, and
I
that
know
stuff gets into your mind, dude. And it's
it
really hard to
does.
deal with that stuff.
Yeah, I think that fear of judgment is huge. I think that's a real obstacle for everybody if we're honest with each other. Even starting the podcast, in the back of my mind, there's like, well, what are are people going to think we're just full of shit, and what do we really
They
have
do,
to
Cass.
add? And I know, um, but at the same time, it's like we've talked about. I, at some point, though, if you want to make a difference, and if you want to tap into some of these things, and you want to really figure out, and because remember, this is really about figuring out what you're capable of. This is all about you. It's not about anybody else. It's about you taking
Yeah.
and seizing an opportunity to discover where your metal is, what you can really do, what you're really where your boundaries are, how far you can push and challenge, and the skills that you can develop. And when you get into the arena, like you're going to have hecklers, man. There's going to be the people in the stands that are going to be saying all
Yeah.
kinds of shit and passing all kinds of judgment, and none of it matters. You've got to find a way to block that stuff out and not pay attention to the noise. You hear it in sports all the time. The teams talk about not paying attention to the noise and whatever the national media is saying and this, that, or the
Yeah.
other, because it doesn't matter, man. At the end of the day, you've got to go out, you've got to execute, you've got to do your thing. And
Well, it happened to Bama last weekend, dude.
yeah, sometimes it works out great, and every once in a while you come up short, and that's okay. That's life.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
it's not going to just
you,
happen to you. It happens to all of us.
I think what happens though, and I've experienced this firsthand a few times, is you get to the end of this project and you start to have these thoughts, right? These thoughts are starting to enter your mind, and you're like, did I do enough? First of all, did I do enough? And I know we've drilled down into, when do you know when is good enough good enough? How long do I need to work on this? You start to have these doubts of like, you start to compare yourself to other people. And then I start to think about like, well, what's Cass going to think? When I put this out there, what he's going to look at it and he's going to make a judgment, whether he says it or not, he's going to, right? And that's just human nature. And then you start thinking about, well, I don't want to embarrass myself in front of Cass, or I don't want to embarrass myself in front of my mom or my friends or my audience or whomever it may be, whatever project you're working on, and those thoughts, man, those are tough to combat.
They are.
And unfortunately, you just don't know the answer until you do the thing.
Yeah, that's right.
And you can talk yourself out of this comes back to the title of the show, Wrestling with Potential. You can talk yourself out of some really good shit if you let yourself.
Yep, you totally can.
Yeah, and so in a lot of ways, you just kind of have to talk yourself off of this ledge and have this fuck it kind of mentality, and just plow forward.
Well, at some
do
point
the hard work.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, do the hard work so that you're proud of the product that you put out, but when at the end of it, when you do put it out there, when you do complete that project, or when you do accomplish whatever it is you said that you're going to do, first of all, you need to be proud of it. You have to be able to look back on it and know that you did the work that it required. And you know what? If it works, awesome. If it doesn't, dude, like if you give it your best, then I mean, there's not a lot else you could have done, right? The worst thing that you could do, this is just my opinion, but the worst thing that you could do is tear it up and throw it in the trash and not complete that project or not put it out there.
Yeah, well, I think what we fail to realize oftentimes is it's always an iterative process. Like you never go from 0 to 100 perfectly every time, right? There's always
Yeah, that's right.
There's a reason there's a reason that you have JV and varsity. There's a reason that you go from wingman to four-ship to instructor, or to mission commander to instructor, right? It's because there's skills that have to be developed along the way. And so I think, and the other thing too, is at some point you just have to have a little bit of belief in yourself, and you have to go back to remember why you're doing this to begin with. You're doing this to explore those facets of yourself. It's not about anybody else, right? And yeah, you may come up short. So what do you do in those situations? You take the lessons learned, you apply them to the next time, and you push and you move forward, right? You can't get mired down in that stuff. But it goes,
this project that I'm working on, I'm on version 10.
Yeah. That's a big project too.
Well, I'm not lying. I'm on version 10.
Yeah, I believe it.
Version 1 was fucking terrible. Version 10, not as terrible.
Yeah.
It's still bad. But that's the point, right? Is each time it's getting a little bit better.
That's right.
It's just getting a little bit better and a little bit better. And eventually, maybe when I'm on version 69, it'll be good enough for me to send to CAS and let you take a look at it.
Yeah, and realize too that as you go through these things and you start to build and develop some of these skills, they'll build on each other, so exposure is a big part of this as well, right? You have to expose yourself to different challenges, to different scenarios in order to be able to develop skills to fully navigate those things.
Yeah. Well, in short, that's called experience.
Yeah. Right. It takes some experience. It takes some winning and some failing to build that bucket, right? To build that situational awareness and to build that toolkit so that you know kind of how to attack different situations and scenarios. But going back to just wrestling with potential, Roscoe, because you talked about setting goals and the importance of that, and as we discussed, them being specific and measurable and timely and things of those nature. For me, that really goes back to when you go into a process like this, you have to learn how to balance your expectations a little bit, right? So you've got to be able to find ways to set some realistic, attainable goals in order to grow and to develop those skills. It's good to push boundaries and to strive for improvement so that you can realize full potential. But if, the things that you set out to do are so ridiculously ambitious that nobody would ever be able to achieve it, like if we talked about this in budgeting, right? Like if your goal is to go, well, I'm going to make $2 million in the next year, but you make $39,000 a year right now and you don't know how to invest and you don't have any capital.
Yeah.
And like there's you've got to be realistic about it. So try not to set unrealistic standards for yourself when you go through this process. You got to manage your expectations correctly, because if you have some unrealistically high standards, dude, you're going to get frustrated. You're going to get disappointed, or you're just going to get burnt out. And then your ability to continue on that path and develop those skills, it all goes back to the goal planning stuff that we've talked about in the past.
Yeah.
So you got to find a middle ground there. What I'm getting at is you got to find a middle ground where you can push yourself consistently outside of your comfort zone, acknowledge your progress, celebrate the small victories along the way. Because if you don't do that, then that's where you'll get into the burnout or, the discouragement, the disappointment, and all those things that'll detract from your ability to move forward.
Yeah, expectation management's huge, man, and I think it's easier to do for other people or other organizations, like a project that you're working on at work. It's easy for you to go to your boss and go, "Hey, man, let me just let you know, like you've given me this deadline, and I can meet that deadline, but it's probably going to come at a suffer of quality. We just don't have enough hours and manpower or resources or widgets or whatever it is." I know I experienced that when I was coaching football, expectation management to the players, to the parents, to the other teams, whatever it was, to the other coaches. It's easy to set forth those expectations and outline those, like, here's what you can expect from this. I think it's a little bit different when you start talking between your own ears. because it starts to invite some of these other discussions that we've been talking about, the imposter syndrome, the self-sabotage, etc., the fear of failure, the fear of success. And I really think, man, I'm a big believer in visualization. And people will use this, and people will say different things about it, but man, I can tell you, like, to sit there and just see yourself with that finished product and hold that finished product in your hand, or give that presentation, to see yourself on the stage giving that talk, or see yourself, we used to call it chair flying, see yourself going through the motions and visualizing every instance of this. I really think that helps, man. And I think that helps with the expectation management. If you know you're not great at something, the way you get better at it is to do more of it, right? And one of the ways that you can practice that is through visualization. I was just having this conversation with a dude a few days ago at work. Last week, I think we were talking about it, and his IP came back in after the sortie, and he goes, "Oh man, that was tough." I said, "Well, I mean, did he give a good briefing?" He goes, "Not really." And then the execution wasn't awesome. And we're kind of joking on our way to the bathroom about what we expect out of the debrief, right? Like, expectation management here. This is probably going to be terrible.
Yeah.
Right? The dude fucking nailed it, man. He 100% like nailed the debrief. Now, he had fucked up the brief and the execution so bad that he just couldn't pass the sortie. Like, you got to get 2 out of the 3, right?
Yeah.
You either got to nail the brief and the debrief and then fuck up the execution, or some combination of that. But you got to have 2 shells out of 3 to make it a win. But he did, man. He nailed it. And both the instructor and I were just kind of like, okay, color me wrong, man, because we did not see that coming, and the irony of that, and what I've been talking about, this kind of this trope that I've been kicking down for the last couple of minutes, is the visualization piece of it. The debrief is the one part of the sortie that you can't chair fly. You can't practice a debrief until you have the event done. Yeah. You can practice the brief in front of the mirror, or in front of your bros, or in a room with a whiteboard by yourself. You can practice the execution in a simulator, or sitting in a chair, or, chair flying through the comm or the picture calls or whatever it is. But you can't practice that debrief until you've done the event.
Yeah.
It's so very difficult. Like, portions of it you can.
What you can do is you can build structure around it, right? So that you've got a format,
and that's what I was getting at. Yeah, the plans, products, brief, admin, TAC admin. We can go through all that stuff, and I can look at that, and I can kind of have an idea of where I'm going to go with it. But you can't get to a DFP unless you have the DFP, right? You can have an idea of the methodology behind it, but for him to come in there and do that completely blew both of us away.
That's awesome. Yeah, well,
I mean, good on him. He's at least got something to build on now.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and what you were talking about at the beginning of that conversation too was a good segue into what my next bullet point was, which was overcoming self-doubt. And I had a moment of clarity when I was putting the notes together, and so I just wrote this out. So I'm just going to read this, because if I try to do it, I didn't bulletize this one because I actually wrote like a paragraph, and I'll just fuck it up. But so overcoming self-doubt is part of how we wrestle with potential. And what I put down was the internal voices of doubt and uncertainty can often become the most formidable obstacles in our journey towards realizing our full potential. These persistent negative thoughts can undermine our confidence, hinder our progress, and prevent us from taking necessary risks or seizing valuable opportunities. And this is what you were talking about earlier. Self-doubt manifests in various forms, such as imposter syndrome, fear of failure, or a general sense of inadequacy. It can lead to self-sabotaging behaviors, procrastination, or settling less for than what we're truly capable of achieving. Overcoming these internal barriers requires a combination of self-awareness, positive self-talk, which you can also kind of do through visualization as well, right? See yourself finishing the task, see yourself getting the award from the boss, or getting across that finish line, and concrete actions that challenge our limiting beliefs. By cultivating self-compassion, seeking support from mentors or peers, and gradually pushing outside our comfort zones, we can begin to quiet these doubt-filled voices and build self-assurance needed to pursue goals with conviction and resilience.
That sounds like the back cover of a really good book. No, that's good, man. There's a lot in there, and I think it's a good summation of everything that we've been talking about.
Yeah. So, But yeah, I think self-doubt's a huge piece of it. It's those, like you were saying, those voices in the back of our head that bring up that, can you really do this? Are you really good enough? And that goes right into
Yeah.
that environment, right? Like, what's the messaging that you have? What's the messaging that you give yourself? Um, do you consider yourself capable? All those types of things.
Well,
So
well, there's a huge element in there of knowing yourself, you know, and um, like you told me the other day, you told me that you signed up for an event coming up and that you've been practicing and you've been getting into a training program for that. And
talk about the
you
half
know, when we
marathon.
hung up the what's that?
You talking about the half marathon?
Yeah, whatever it was you signed up for. I wasn't going to spill the beans if you didn't want me to,
Oh
but
yeah, that's
yeah, you
fun.
told me you were signing up for a marathon and that you
Yeah,
were starting to train for it.
yeah,
And when we hung up the phone, I started thinking, I was like, man, I wonder if I could run a marathon. And then I went out jogging, and when I came back to the house, my knees and my back hurt, and I was like, nope. there's I can suffer through 4 miles. There's no way I could suffer through 26.2. There, yeah, I'd be broken. I would be a broken man. So knowing your limitations, knowing yourself physically, mentally, spiritually, I think goes right back to the same thing that we harp on over and over again, is that mind, body, soul balance, and really just getting to know yourself, man. Spend some
yeah.
time alone in your own head. And man, it's so difficult today when you've got all this sensory input coming in from all different angles, man.
So
I mean,
much
I'm sitting here on my
distraction.
computer and I've got seven windows open on my computer on my two screens here. There's so much that we have coming into our lives and so many distractions. And
Yeah, so
it
much
seems like
distraction.
every time I log into Instagram or Facebook, it's somebody celebrating something or some sponsored ad that somebody accomplished something, and you start to think about, well, if that guy could do it, maybe I could do it. Dude, if you don't know yourself and if you haven't gone through those processes yet, it's very difficult, but you have to stop comparing yourself. And I realize, guys, I realize that I sound like I'm talking out both sides of my mouth because I was literally just talking about comparing myself to other people.
Yeah,
I struggle with this. It's fucking hard,
yeah,
right? It's very difficult to have messaging coming in one side going, you can do it, and another message going, no, dude, you're too old, or you're too broke, or you're too this or too that. And if you don't really know yourself, you don't have an answer to those questions or that input coming in.
yeah. Well, in comparison leads to shame, and we've had that whole conversation around shame and what that does. Um, but I think another thing, I totally agree with you, bro. And I think another piece of this is your environment. The environment that you're in could stifle your ability to wrestle with potential, or it
Yeah.
could completely support it. So,
Your support structure. Yeah.
right, yeah, the one of five, right? Like, who are the
Yep.
people that you're surrounding yourself with? Are they in your corner? Are they
Yeah.
people that are picking you up, that are uplifting you, that have belief in you, that are helping battle those
Mm-hmm.
self-doubting voices in your mind? Or are there people in your life that are just adding to it, that are sitting there telling you, yeah, you're not good enough, you can't do that, you're not smart enough to do that, you're not capable enough to
Yeah.
do that, you'll never go to college, you'll never graduate from a 4-year degree program,
Yeah.
whatever it is,
Yeah.
you can't
Hey,
fly jets, you're not smart enough to do that.
you know what I
um
just thought of, man? This is something that we were talking about offline the other day. We were talking about the younger generations now don't get some of our older references, and we were talking about Adam Sandler and the CDs that he put out in the late 90s and early aughts.
yeah,
And one of them was, they're all going to laugh at you. No, they're all going to laugh at you. You can't go to school like that, and as you're talking, I'm sitting here thinking about, yeah, dude, they're all going to fucking laugh at you. When you put this out there for the world to see, they're all going to laugh at you.
yeah,
Well, maybe they will, maybe they
maybe
won't,
they
but you don't
will.
know if you don't fucking try,
That's right. But my point in saying all that stuff is, like, if you're in an environment that's not supportive, then maybe it's time to take some steps to change that environment. Maybe it's time to
Yeah.
reassess your friend group. Maybe it's time to reassess your peer group. Um, we've talked about this with mentorship. If there's a specific direction that you want to go move towards, but you don't know anybody that looks like that, smells like that, does things like that, maybe you should go
Yeah.
find some of them and start talking to them. I mean, you've got to
Yeah.
do things to improve the environment that you're in. A negative or restricted environment will stifle creativity. It'll dampen your motivation. It's going to limit your ability to explore potential and what your capabilities are. You know, and that's your social networks, maybe the cultural context that you have placed around yourself, the own personal defeating beliefs that you may have about yourself, the messaging that you may have gotten as a kid. You got to find a way to flush those things and then build an environment around you that's going to help you move forward.
Well, I would say know your audience, for one. For example, in a fighter squadron, we tend to be pretty ruthless with our feedback sometimes.
Yeah.
And we tend to be manly men full of bravado and ego and confidence and cockiness. And if I came into the fighter bar and I announced to the fighter bar that I was about to start making pink dresses for a living, I would probably get ridiculed for that.
Yeah.
And people would laugh at me. And so my point in saying that is know your audience. You know, if you're going to put something out there for people, by the way, I'm not designing and building pink dresses. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Awesome
it's just
if you
not my
did,
bag.
though.
But I probably could.
You probably could.
I should get one.
You probably
I should get a
really
pink
good
dress
at it.
with I get pink dress with old balls on the front of it.
Yeah.
That's an inside joke for the listeners. So knowing your audience and knowing who you're putting this stuff out there to is part of the process. The other part, another part I think is, when you do put that thing out there, or when you do expose yourself to your circle that you're trying this thing, it's okay if they don't want to, if they're not going to be supportive of that. That's okay. That's their choice. Recognize that and move forward, you know, and keep searching for those people who are going to be supportive of you. And the example that I give is, a while back, I was pitching this idea to some people sitting around, and people who are pretty close. And as I started discussing what I was working on and what my vision for it was, one of the people just got up and walked away, didn't say a word, just got up and walked away and went and started doing something else. And immediately in the back of my mind, I said, okay, out of my circle, you're done. Like, if you're not even going to sit here and listen to the pitch, like, I can't do anything with that. So I started searching for other people to fill that position. And you know what? It's water off a duck's back. I mean, it is what it is. It's no hard feelings. It's just another check in the container that, okay, that person's not going to be supportive of me in this.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep looking, and I'm going to find some people who are.
Yeah. And it goes back to, I think at some point, you know, especially if you're a younger man, I don't think we think about this stuff as much, but as you start to get, you know, a little older or start to work in a specific profession and you want to advance and things like that, you have to start to get intentional about that 1 of 5. You have to start to get intentional about who you hang out with and kind of the group that you run around with, and pay attention to some of those things, because that environment is going to be very important in the potential of your success down the road.
Yeah. Yeah. It's huge. And this is why, I mean, if you go to my website, paulroscoewhite.com, you'll see this stuff tattooed all over the front cover of the website, because I think it's hugely important to surround yourself with the right people. And not only that, but, you know, let's just bring it back to what we can control, and what's between our ears is, don't ever lose sight of this idea that you're in somebody's circle of 5. You are influencing someone else. And when you start to think about it along those lines, you're like, man, what kind of message am I sending if I quit on this thing, or if I half-ass this thing? Like, I owe it to them. If nothing else, I owe it to them.
Yeah.
To give it the effort that it deserves, and to put out a quality product in the end, regardless of what it is, whether it's learning a new language or writing a book or doing a presentation at work or whatever, right? I owe it to these people who are looking to me for influence, because you never know. You just never know when you're going to influence somebody else. You have no idea.
Well, and if you find a way to cultivate and build a positive environment around yourself, then guess what you're going to be able to do for other people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well,
Like you're going to be able to pick up and fulfill that supportive role for somebody else down the road and help
yeah.
them on that through that process and on that journey of wrestling with potential and figuring out what they're really capable of. I mean, we did that every day in the fighter squadrons as well. You know, you
Yeah.
find guys that have some skill and you take them under your wing and you just help develop and nudge and teach and stuff along the way, and then they turn into really great tactical experts or officers and wingmen and
Mm-hmm.
flight leads and instructors. So that's
Well,
all
dude,
part of
like
that process.
negativity is contagious. And I know that you've seen this. You see it in these little cliques in your workspace or with your friend group, or, you get one guy in your friend group that starts bitching about, you know, politics, for example. And then before you know it, the whole group is bitching about politics or baseball or whatever it is, right? Negativity is contagious. Well, guess what? Positivity is contagious too. And I choose to be positive. I choose to be a happy person. I don't want to focus on all the negative energy that's coming out. I read the news. All right. I know what's going on around me. And I know a lot of it right now is just not positive stuff. But an example is, you got a hurricane relief effort that's going on in North Carolina right now, and all the shit show that's fallen out of that, and all the bad stories that the media is throwing out there. You got the political landscape right now, because this is the fucking political Super Bowl that's happening in the next, what is it, 40 something days, right? 30 days.
30 days, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, you got the middle of the football season, and teams are losing left and right. Alabama was number 1 for about 5 minutes, and then they lost to fucking Vanderbilt, right? There's a lot of negativity out there.
Yeah.
But you know what I focused on Saturday morning? I was watching College Game Day, right? And they have a segment on there where Pat McAfee picks some rando out of the crowd, and if this kid can kick a 30-yard field goal, Kirk Herbstreit is holding the ball. If this kid can kick a 30-yard field goal, he gets $100,000, or at the time it was going to be $75,000 for scholarship money for him. And they interview him a little bit, and he's in fucking Vans and like blue jeans, and they're like, there's no way, right? The kid actually kicked a really good ball and missed by just a couple of feet. So then, mob mentality, the crowd starts getting on about one more kick. And so they go, okay, bet. We're going to give him another kick. And we're going to up it to $100K. And tell you what, we were going to donate $500,000 to the hurricane relief effort from the College Game Day Fund. If you make this kick, we'll make it 600. We'll match that 100, and we'll make it 600,000. And I'll be goddamned if that dude didn't fucking nail it.
That's awesome.
It was a line drive kick, but it was right down the middle, and like the crowd went wild. It was so awesome. It was beautiful to see that much happiness and joy in that moment, right? Despite the world just crumbling around us. If you watch the news, there are those little vignettes of really awesome shit, and that's the kind of stuff I want to focus on. Positive stuff, man. Uplifting.
Yeah, well, that segues nicely into my next point, which is I think oftentimes, especially if we do struggle with any self-confidence, we kind of think of potential or the development of our own skills as like this innate fixed quality rather than something that can actually be developed. Like it's something that other people have, but I don't have it type of a mentality. But it goes back to having a growth mindset, right? It goes back to recognizing that you can cultivate these things about yourself, that you can build these skills for yourself through dedicated effort, man, through that constant improvement process in learning by staying curious and by practicing, by just going out there and figuring out what you got to do and then putting the effort in and practicing it and getting better and developing it over time. So,
well, I would say manage your expectations around that, because you might just not have the talent to do something, right? And
sure.
We use sports so many times as an analogy around here. That's an easy one. Could I ever get to a point where I can shoot 3-pointers as good as Steph Curry? Probably not, because the guy just has tremendous talent, and he's been working on that skill for so many years, and I mean, I'm a little old in the tooth. I'm not as physically gifted as he is. So I think managing your expectations around the goal that you set, I think, is going to be a big key in what you were just talking about.
Yeah. And I think I'm talking more about those kind of innate skills, or maybe that unlocked potential or skills that we think we may have, but we're too afraid to go attempt for all those reasons that we've already discussed.
Yeah.
Um, that's where you need to apply that growth mindset, and get outside your
Yeah,
comfort
for
zone
sure.
and start to develop those things. And it is.
Well,
But what you're saying is absolutely accurate. It doesn't happen overnight. You develop these things over time. There's that
yeah.
experiential component that goes along with it. It's not a switch you throw. The effort can be a switch you throw sometimes. Maybe shifting perspective to a growth mindset and looking at challenges as opportunities and failures as a way to learn.
Yeah.
That can be a switch that you throw in your mind. But building and developing those things, that takes time, man. You don't roll into a fighter squadron as a lieutenant and you don't come out of the B course and go right into the foreflug, and there's a
Right.
reason for that, right? It takes time to build the skills and the situational awareness and all of the things that you have to do to be good enough
Yeah.
to do those things, to lead. So,
Well, there's a reason that old people play pickleball and not soccer, right? It's
yeah,
a lot of times, you're going to have limitations on what you're capable of, and it could be something as simple as time. Maybe you just don't have the time. Um, Maybe you don't have the resources that you need. If you want to become better at something, you might have to invest into that to be able to get it.
yeah,
An example would be, if you want to learn to play a musical instrument, you're probably going to have to purchase that instrument. You might have to pay for some lessons, or at least spend a lot of time watching YouTube videos or something, and some of those instruments are expensive. So you could be limited. I would say jot that down as a goal, and when you're doing your goal planning, factor that in. Factor that into your deadline. If your goal is to learn how to play a guitar, but you don't have a guitar, factor into your planning process a saving program that gets you to a point where you can purchase a guitar. These are manageable, given enough time and effort. You can probably get this done.
yeah,
If time is a resource that you don't have, well, then you have to get a little more creative in some other ways.
yeah, yeah. But I think that's important, is that it's manageable. All of these things you can do, but it requires, one, some self-inspection to figure out what it is exactly that you want to drill down on, and then
Yeah.
two, just coming up with a game plan on how you're going to attack it, and then going out and
Yeah.
attempting it
Yeah.
and working on it.
It's, and we can't just gloss over the idea that depending on what it is, it could be really fucking hard, man.
It can.
It could be really difficult to reach that goal, or find that potential, or learn that thing about yourself.
Dude,
And
none
I
of
would
this is,
just encourage people to know that going in, and don't
yeah,
let that be the limfac.
yeah. None of this is easy necessarily, but it can be fun and it can be exciting because you get to learn stuff about yourself. But it doesn't mean it's easy. And if we're honest about it, like the self-inspection piece alone isn't easy. Like, it's hard sometimes to be really brutally honest with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you might discover some things about you that aren't really good things, aren't things that you
Yeah.
necessarily like about how you approach certain
You might not be
situations
proud of it.
or
Yeah.
people. Yeah, and and there may be a period where, if you're going through some of that stuff and you're trying to change your vector or things, there's a little bit of amends that have to happen, and that's normal.
Yeah.
But yeah, none of this is necessarily easy.
Well, in the big picture, and just to kind of put a bow on it at the end, I think that there's probably a lot of ways that you can mitigate, or head off a lot of the things that we've talked about. One of those, obviously, is being concrete in your goal setting process, right? And go back and listen to our episode on goal setting and how to do that, what it means, what are the elements that go into it. And then there's another episode about planning, and that goes into the planning for that goal, knowing what the outcome is and how do you get there, your roadmap out in front of you with your milestones and all that. I think that's a really good way, because you said it before, structure is one of those things that's going to help you overcome a lot of these things. Something that
Yeah,
we benefited from in the fighter squadron a lot was the structure of it all. We had our roadmap out in front of us almost all the time. Like every day you came in, you knew what you were going to do that day. It was just a matter of getting it briefed up and going and doing it. Right. The other thing is, I think a little bit of self-management, self-regulation in the form of that MBS balance and managing your anxiety and your mental health around some of these things, and try your best to this is Roscoe talking out both sides of his mouth, but try your best to squash that negative talk and listen to the positive stuff. Obviously you have to be realistic about it. You have to be real when you talk to yourself and don't fluff your ego about it. But if you can learn to manage some of that anxiety and some of that self-sabotage and self-doubt, then I think that puts you in a better mental space. And when you're in a better mental space, you're just going to execute at a higher level.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's also important to stress that while this can be a difficult process, it's also necessary if you want to grow.
Mm-hmm.
It's also what you have to do. It's also the steps that you have to take if you want to improve and develop skills, and wrestle with that potential that may be there for you. And the other thing that I would say too is at some point, you just got to be comfortable being uncomfortable, because all of this requires you getting outside of that comfort zone and challenging yourself and stretching yourself in ways that isn't necessarily going to be a comfortable process. But when you do that, the things that you learn from it are just going to help you become a better person and develop those skills. So,
well, yeah. And I think at the end of the day, when we're talking about wrestling with potential, the bottom line is you don't know if you don't try.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's no way to know what the outcome in or what that judgment is going to look like if you don't try it.
Live
right.
with no, but not what if.
Yeah. And you took the words right out of my mouth, man. I was going to say, go back and listen to our very first episode where we talked about what if, and if you don't try, you've always got to live with that questioning. Yep. Whereas, you know what, if you do put it out there for the world to see and the feedback is negative, dude, at least that's good. That's feedback. That's room for growth. It's a failure, goes in the L column. But now you can make version 2 maybe a little bit better.
Yep.
That too could fail. That too could be, could be terrible. But by the time you get to version 69, maybe it's good.
Yeah.
But you don't know if you don't try.
That's so it. I would not be here if I lived in a world of what if.
Yeah.
If I would have just gone, well, so it's, you got to get in it. And that process was not comfortable through a lot of it. It wasn't always fun. But it was necessary. It was necessary for me to get to where I wanted to go and to get to the goals that I had for myself. So,
I got to jump off of a waterfall in Hawaii. I'm scared of heights. And I had to climb up on top of this rock and look down at the water below me, 30 or 40 feet below me. And I remember having this thought up there going, well, it ain't going to jump off itself. And it was one of those YOLO moments, man. It was like, dude, if I want this memory, I got to fucking do the plunge, man. And I did the best can opener you ever seen, big splash. And somebody got it on video, actually flash-based, and got it on video for me. And I have this great memory now because I was able to say, fuck it, and jump.
Yeah. Sometimes you got to make that jump.
Yeah, you got to try. The last thing, man, and we're getting ready to wrap up here, but the last thing is I wanted to tell this story. Katie recently flew to Alabama, and her flight was delayed out of Phoenix for about 45 minutes. She landed in Dallas with about 5 minutes to catch her next flight, and she missed it. So she called me. She's breathing hard because she ran from one terminal to the next one, and she goes, we need to do this, we need to do that, da 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 da. And I go into problem solving mode, and I got the computer out, and I'm ready to rent her a car because now she's not going to Montgomery, she's going to Birmingham, and the sky's falling, and we finally got in touch with Tyler. We got her a ride, and everybody was able to take a deep breath, and I could tell that she was just a little bit riled up, naturally, and I think anyone would be. Anxiety and just you're pissed,
frustration,
your travel day didn't go the way. Yeah, man, I'm fucking in an airport. Now I went from terminal D to terminal B, and now I got to go back to terminal E, and right. So I took a picture of our dog who was sleeping on the couch upside down with his feet in the air, and he looked like a corkscrew. I took a picture of him and sent it to her, and I just said, smile. And that's what I would leave the listeners with is, when things are going really bad, or when you're having this self-doubt and this creep coming into your mind, just smile, go for a walk, try to put yourself in a better headspace. And trust me, from personal experience, I can tell you it's a lot easier to be happy than it is mad.
Yeah. Yeah. I would just say, let's fucking go.
All right, let's do it. I'm down. I'm down, man. I'm down to ride.
Right.
Whatever.
On.
Let's do it. I don't even care what we're doing. Let's just fucking strap it on and go for it.
Let's do it.
All right. You got anything else, dude?
Nope. Be the change.
All right. Be the one. Thanks for flying with the Be One Change One podcast. If you got something out of this show, then be the one and share it in your circles of influence.
You can be our wingman through our website at www.be1change1.com. That's B and the number 1, change and the number 1.com.
We invite you to be the one and join our fighter squadron on social media at Be1Change1 on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You can follow us at Paul Roscoe White on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, as well as Roscoe's website, www.paulroscoewhite.com.
You can email us from the website, and please leave comments, share, and ask questions, or leave ideas of things you would like to discuss on future podcasts. Most importantly, be the one that helps us win the algorithm by leaving a review on whatever platform you're listening on.
Thanks for joining. Until next time, be the one.